Hickory sticks, cheesies and a snack that shaped a nation. Close your eyes. The year is 1985. You're standing in a corner store. The bell above the door is jingling. That sound your brain stopped processing years ago because it's been constant your whole life. Your fingers already know exactly where to reach. No thinking, no hesitation, pure muscle memory. And then everything changes. By 1996, your hand reaches for the same spot and there's nothing there. The shelf is empty. The snack is gone. Not just from that store, from everywhere. And nobody warned us. Nobody said goodbye. It just disappeared. This is the story of how Canada lost a war we didn't even know we were fighting. A war fought not with weapons, but on corner store shelves. A war where American corporations quietly erased Canadian snacks from existence. And we were too loyal to notice until it was too late. But it's also the story of what those snacks meant. Why a child's hand could find them blindfolded. Why grown adults still talk about them 40 years later. Why the memory of biting into one can transport you instantly back to 1985, to your neighborhood, to your childhood, to the exact feeling of being Canadian in an era when being Canadian meant something specific, something that tasted like hickory smoke and cheddar cheese and childhood summers. This is what we lost, and why it still matters. The era when snacking meant something. It's 1985, and Canada isn't worried about the future yet. We have our own culture, our own brands, our own way of doing everything. The world feels big enough, and we feel secure enough to just live. Saturday mornings are sacred. Hockey night in Canada followed by cartoons, and snacks are woven into the ritual like they're part of the broadcast itself. Your kitchen counters smell like salt and the faint hickory smoke drifting from the living room. The TV isn't just background noise. It's the heartbeat of the house. And the snacks are the pulse underneath. Regional pride is real. If you're from Belleville, Ontario, you know that cheesies come from your backyard, made there since 1953, with actual cheddar cheese powder, not the artificial approximation. Out in the Maritimes, you have your own regional obsessions. The prairies have theirs. Toronto and Vancouver are discovering what it means when different cultures collide in a corner store and kids start trading snacks like their currency. Quebec keeps its traditions alive. Nobody compares notes because we don't have to. We assume everyone has what we have. Life is slower. Childhood means playing outside until the streetlights come on, your fingers sticky with salt, coming home to reruns and snack boxes stacked in the pantry. Nobody thinks about where snacks come from. They just are. Permanent. Inevitable. Like winter. Like the CBC at dinner time. Like belonging to something called Canada that has its own taste, its own identity, its own way of being the world. We don't know yet that nothing is permanent. Hostess potato chips. Listen, Hostess wasn't just a snack. It was a statement of what Canadian snacking could be. That jingle? 'Cause when you got the munchies, nothing else will do. It's in your head during hockey night in Canada. It's playing on CBC during Saturday morning cartoons. It's the voice in your brain when you reach for the shelf. Hostess didn't apologize for taking up space in your home. They owned it. They owned us. The bags were distinctive. The flavor was consistent. The mascots were everywhere. On TV, in stores, in your lunchbox. Hostess didn't feel like an American brand trying to sell to Canada. Hostess was Canada. It had been here since the 1930s. It felt like ours. And for 50 years, it was hickory sticks. Now we're talking about something deeper. Hickory sticks were never sophisticated. They were just potato sticks with hickory smoke flavoring. Deceptively simple, dangerously addictive, and absolutely unmistakably Canadian. Do you remember that taste? That specific hickory smoke flavor that American snack companies have been trying to replicate for 40 years and still can't get right? Across Ontario and the prairies, hickory sticks were the after-school snack. Not one option among many. The option, kids traded them in lunchboxes like they were rare commodities. I'll give you 2 hickory sticks for one of your Dunkaroos. The flavor was so particular, so distinctly them, that it became part of your DNA as a Canadian kid. When you tasted hickory sticks, you tasted what Canadian snacking was supposed to be. And for decades, nobody questioned whether they'd always be there. Cheesies, the Belleville pride. This deserves its own moment. Cheesies weren't just a snack choice. They were a statement. Made in Belleville, Ontario since 1953, they represented something that went way beyond snacking. They represented Canadian manufacturing, Canadian taste, Canadian stubbornness. Not every region had the same emotional attachment to them. Western Canada had its own snack loyalties. But in Ontario and Quebec, cheesies weren't optional. They were the default, the flavor you reached for without thinking. The cheddar was made with actual cheddar cheese powder. Your fingers turned a specific shade of orange. Your tongue tingled slightly from salt. That was the deal. We accepted it. We loved it. We came back for more. Cheesies was proof that Canada could make something better than what America offered. And we carried that pride with us every time we bought a box. Dunkaroos, thrills, and the lunchbox economy. Then there were the treasures. Dunkaroos were absurd. Colorful, sugar-loaded, ridiculous cookies with frosting and sprinkles that seemed to exist in a category of their own. They felt exotic, American, but also somehow Canadian. They were the gold standard of lunchbox trading. Kids who had Dunkaroos had status. Thrills gum was weird. That purple wrapper. The jingle, Thrills gum, tastes just like tweed. Did it taste like tweed cologne? Nobody knew. Nobody cared. It was ours. It was strange and specific and Canadian, and we bought it anyway. The lunchbox economy was real. These weren't just snacks, they were social currency. Your worth in grade 4 was measured by what was in your lunchbox. Fritos corn chips had their moment before they became Lay's. Ketchup chips seemed like a fever dream. Canada's own flavor, impossible and perfect. Cinnamon Toast Crunch tasted different in Canada, better somehow, and we all knew it even if we couldn't quite explain why. This was how we learned what it meant to be Canadian. Not through civics class or the national anthem. Through snacks. The shift, 1987. And then, quietly, everything started to change. In 1987, Hostess Canada partnered with Frito-Lay. At the time, this seemed like progress, expansion, resources, distribution, bigger, better, more. What it actually meant was that American corporate logic, profit margins and market consolidation and quarterly earnings, started replacing Canadian decision-making. Frito-Lay had one primary goal: maximize margins. This isn't evil. It's just how global corporations think. But it meant that Canadian snacks with loyal audiences but smaller profit margins suddenly looked like problems. They took up shelf space. They required specific manufacturing. They didn't fit the streamlined, standardized, American-optimized playbook. The clock started ticking. 1996. The year everything disappeared. By 1996, the decisions weren't being made in Toronto anymore. They were being made in Houston, in boardrooms where nobody had eaten these snacks, where nobody had a childhood memory attached to them, where they were just numbers on a spreadsheet. Dunkaroos vanished completely. Not reformulated, not rebranded, gone. Hickory Sticks was cut back to limited distribution. Other regional favorites, the ones that made our snack aisles uniquely Canadian, disappeared so quietly that most people didn't even notice. You just assumed the store had changed brands, that maybe you were misremembering. The American company logic was simple and brutal. Why keep a snack with 40% profit margins when you can push one with 55%? Why maintain Canadian manufacturing when you can consolidate in the States? Why keep regional variations when you can standardize everything across North America? Do you remember that moment when you realized it was gone? For most of us, it wasn't a specific day. It was gradual. You'd go to the store and something would be missing, then something else. Then you'd look at the shelf and realize that half of what you grew up would have been erased. What replaced them? American brands. Lay's became the default. Cheetos replaced regional flavors. Doritos offered the cutting-edge innovation. The snack aisle slowly became less Canadian. Our kids grew up thinking this was normal. They never had to choose between Hickory Sticks and Doritos because Hickory Sticks had already been made a choice they couldn't make. We didn't lose these snacks because we stopped loving them. We lost them because we were too loyal. We didn't complain loudly enough. We assumed they'd always be there. By the time we noticed they were gone, the decision had already been made in a building we'd never entered by people who'd never known us. The Smuggleroos, a story nobody knows. But the story doesn't end with loss. There's something that happened in the shadows that changes everything. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Canadian snacks, especially Dunkaroos, became so rare and so impossibly desired that Americans started paying insane prices on eBay to get them shipped from Canada. We're talking $15 for a $2 snack. Canadian entrepreneurs and teenagers basically created an underground snack trade. There were people whose side business was buying Canadian snacks and shipping them across the border to Americans who couldn't get them anywhere else. Why would Americans pay that much? Because they could taste the difference. These snacks tasted like something. Like real cheese, like real hickory, like actual maple or ketchup flavoring. The formula was superior. The ingredients had weight. And once you tasted the original, nothing else compared. After 1996, the recipes changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Fewer natural ingredients. More artificial flavoring. Cheaper oils. Better margins. Your taste buds knew something was wrong even if you couldn't name it. Then, in 2020, something impossible happened. Dunkaroos came back. After a 16-year absence, these absurd cookies returned Canadian store shelves. When they did, Canadians lost their minds. The posts, the nostalgia, the unboxing videos, the comments from people saying, "I waited 16 years for this." It proved something crucial. These snacks never disappeared from our collective memory. They were waiting. They were part of our DNA. They came back because we remembered them, because we talked about them, because we made it clear that they mattered. What this really means, the deeper story. We need to talk about what this actually means, because it's not about snacks at all. For Canadian boomers and Gen X, these snacks represented the first time we experienced what it meant to lose our culture to American consolidation. Not through war, not through politics, through corner store shelves, through product discontinuation, through corporate decisions made by people who didn't know us and didn't care. You woke up one day and realized that the snacks that defined your childhood, that your own kids were excited about, that connected you to your neighbors and your community and to something specifically Canadian, they were just gone, without warning, without goodbye, without explanation. That feeling, that's worth sitting with. For immigrant families in 1980s Canada, snacks meant something completely different. They were proof of belonging. When your parents bought you cheesies or hickory sticks or Hostess chips, it meant we're Canadian now. These weren't just treats. They were cultural bridges. They were how you learned what it meant to fit in. Kids with immigrant parents would bring their Canadian snacks to school and trade them with other kids. Want to try mine was another way of saying, do you want to know what my family's like? These snacks became the language of belonging in schoolyards across the country. They were how you proved you belonged to Canada. For younger diaspora, kids who grew up with immigrant parents in Canada, these snacks are time machines. Your mom pulls out a box of cheesies and says, "This is what I ate growing up in Canada." And suddenly you taste what she tasted. You understand, in a real visceral way, what her childhood felt like. The snack becomes more than a snack. It becomes a bridge between generations. This generation learned that loyalty doesn't protect you in corporate capitalism. We learned that even things we love can disappear if they're not profitable enough. We learned that American capitalism doesn't care about Canadian identity. It doesn't care about what we grew up with. It cares about margins. But we learned something else too. Nostalgia is powerful. It's shareable. It's proof that something mattered. The fact that we're still talking about these snacks 40 years later proves they were never just snacks. They were markers of time. They were proof of belonging. They were how we understood ourselves as Canadian. What remains? The legacy. What's left after all this? Some snacks survived. Hickory sticks persist in limited distribution. Cheesies is still made in Belleville. Thrills gum somehow endures. They exist in a kind of cultural limbo, available but scarce. proof that Canadian taste still matters somewhere in the supply chain. The younger generation, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, never had what we had. They grew up in a world where American snacks are the default. They don't know what it felt like to walk into a store and assume the snack you loved would be there forever. They miss the era when Canada had its own snack identity, its own flavors, its own way of being in the world. Maybe that's the most important lesson. The things we love aren't guaranteed. The cultures we build aren't automatic. The identity we create isn't permanent unless we protect it, celebrate it, pass it on intentionally. The final moment. We started with you at the corner store in 1985, your hand reaching for the same shelf without thinking. Everything about that moment felt permanent.